Okay, so today we're going to dive a little bit more into JavaScript, but primarily we're going to dive a little bit more into working with the DOM and making interactive websites. But before we do that, I want to take a moment to look at any questions that we had from yesterday, questions, confusions, things that didn't make sense. I'm going to make a list of them here, and then we'll take some time in the morning to go over them. Or I will work to make sure that those elements are included in what we cover today. Does anybody have something they want to see reviewed from yesterday?
Maybe just like a brief synopsis of what the DOM is again.
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure on what it is.
We're definitely gonna talk about that today because that's primarily what we're gonna be working with. So that's good. Anything else?
It's just the interface, right? Where you're.
Yeah, we'll just go over it when we go over it. Anything else? Everything else yesterday was crystal clear. Everyone's like, I'm totally 100% on board with everything we did yesterday. Because this is the point where you say, I was not on board with this, 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 and this. This is not like a time to be shy, right? This is like, let me tell you what's not clicking in my brain so we can go over it again today. Kenny.
So anytime we want to print something each time, we just do element.text content.
Yeah, so that's like how to get stuff on screen, right?
And also, so if we wanted to change like an H1, and then say we wanted to change an H2 and an H3, like separate things, how would we specify which one we want to do?
Yeah.
That's what I basically.
We're going to cover that today too and what we do this morning. That's awesome. Good.
Well, a few people were doing some math exercises that I didn't get around to.
Okay.
So I'm curious as to what it was they're working on.
So this is probably related to like code katas. Was that something they were working on, like Code Wars?
Yeah.
Cool.
I think so.
Awesome.
Whenever you put input numbers, I want to learn how to turn it from a string to a number.
Numbers to strings and strings to numbers. Yeah, we're going to do that today too. Awesome. These are all good because like these directly line up with what we're going to do today. That's great. So I love it when your questions lead into today. What that shows me from listening to all, you're starting to make those connections and asking the good questions you need to be asking to continue to climb that ladder. Cool. Anything else from yesterday? Okay. Questions that we don't know yet. That's also okay. Cool. So sometimes like a thing in like education and learning is that sometimes the concepts they may not sink in until like a day or two later when your brain is reflecting back. So if you don't have questions, that's also okay. Cool. I think we're going to talk about just about all of these as we go through today. So what we're going to do this morning is I'm going to give you like a short demo of something, and then we're going to, in class as a whole group, we're going to build one of the homework assignments that we would normally do this week, but we're not going to be able to do as a homework this week because it's a short week, right? So normally we would have a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday homework, but we only have a Monday, Tuesday, Thursday homework this week. So there'll be a homework assignment tonight that'll be due on Thursday, and then Thursday you're going to have an assignment that's due on Monday. And you may hear from Cohort 11 like, oh, you're getting those, huh? Right. They're going to be challenging, but you will have all the bits you need, all of the knowledge pieces you need to tackle them, but they are going to be a little challenging. Cool. So here's our notes for the day. So let's call this.
Should we follow along?
You can if you like.
Are we creating it?
Yeah. So I'm gonna make a new app. I'm gonna call this Counting Clicks. What we're gonna do is we are going to keep working on building off of what we did yesterday, which comes back to some of Kenny's questions and some of Shirley's questions about find elements on the page and manipulate them. We're going to start layering a little bit of logic. So we're going to layer in a little bit of logic and a little bit of events. And talk a little bit more about the DOM, right, about the elements on the page. And then when we're done with this, do an exercise all together that will build kind of a more complex version of what we're going to do. So I'm calling this counting clicks. And again, like this code will all be in the repository. And what I'll try and do, and you all can help me by reminding me, what I like to do on these is make commits along the way so that you can see the progress of work when you're viewing on GitHub. So I will try to, as I build each step, save that work and commit and push it to GitHub. So that way, if you're following along later or you're reviewing the video later, you can go back to GitHub and kind of see that code where it was. So if you see me like trucking along and I'm not stopping, like where you think like, hey, that seems like you just finished a little something, like just be like, hey, can you commit? And I will do a commit. So let's start code. All right, so this is just our standard, hey, I made a new repository, new app. I'm going to do code.npm start. Get this going. So here's VS Code. And here's our, right. So here's our new app default, what it looks like, hello world, bang, question mark. So here's what we're going to build. We're going to build a small little app that will count the number of times we click a button in a page. So we're going to add a button to this page. And bless you. And we're going to count up how many times that button was clicked. So the normal process for this, and this is going to kind of flow pretty much everything you do between now and your final project. And this is kind of what I recommend the process to be. And this will help those people who are on the side of, and you may have heard from like Cohort XI, oh, I hate HTML and CSS. And then, oh, I hate JavaScript. The challenge with that is, you're all going to have things you enjoy in this, and you're going to have things that are challenging. This process will help you balance that. Right? This process will help you get over some of the, I don't want to spend time working on this, and I don't want to spend time working on that. And it also is probably the simplest way of tackling this like blank page problem. Kind of the same problem you have when you start a blog, right? Same problem you're going to have when you start an app. What do? What we want you to do is start out with like laying out the page in a little sketch. And you'll see this when we do the exercise later. It's essentially what we're starting with. So almost always, sometimes just in my mind, or sometimes on a piece of paper, or that's not dark enough you won't see, or on a whiteboard, I will kind of draw out in very rough view what I want this app to look like. So this app's going to be pretty simple. So there's going to be some text. It's going to be our click count. There's no E on count. C-O-U-N-T. There's going to be a button. And that's pretty much it. But almost always I start with something like this. Even if it's just a quick sketch on a piece of paper, or it's on the whiteboard, or it's in my mind. I find it's better even if I just write it out. To the point where if I'm doing something like putting it on a piece of paper like this, or if I do it on a whiteboard, I'm a whiteboard person, I have to do it this way. I can't draw on paper. I tried using programs, like sketching tools, I can't. When I'm building something bigger, I will draw it out on a whiteboard, and I'll come with my phone and I'll take a picture of it. And I'll open that picture up on my computer, and that's kind of my reference design, right? Having this sketch really helps. So we're going to build something like this. What we're hoping to do is have this text here start out with a 0. We click this button 0 times, and every time we click this button, we want this counter to increase. That's going to be the first level of what we're building. Okay. So now we have some interaction on the page where the user is taking an action like clicking on a button, and something on the page is updating and reflecting what that is. Cool? So that's the design, right? Amazing. Best app design ever. So if that's our design, what's the next thing that we tend to do? Is literally just lay out the content on the page without any eye to style, with some eye towards semantics, but we're not going to be super specific about it yet. We're not going to worry about classes or any of that stuff yet. We just want to get something on the page so that we can design.
Sorry to interrupt you. I want to follow along, but I cannot get my counting clicks to open on VS for some reason.
Did you go into the directory?
Yeah, I'm in the directory. It keeps telling me it's counting clicks is not a file. Try different things.
So you missed the part where you do app. So you went to the directory, and then we should have done app, beta, counting clicks.
So see, it's over here, so that's why I thought it.
Where did you make it?
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering.
I did it somewhere. You put it in your home folder. So you did that before you did the CD.
You'll move it to the right location.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. Before I did CD, I put it on the front. Got it.
Now you can code dot and npm.
Thank you, everyone's
Yeah,
doing
yeah,
it.
Okay, so let's lay out this page. So we have a big bit of text at the top. That is our counting clicks. Maybe we'll just make that a paragraph, right? And I'll say something like, here's the click count. Here's our click count, and then we're going to have a button that says click me. Cool. So here's our paragraph, and here's our button. Let's do a little bit of styling. Let's just add text align center to the page. Let's make paragraphs. Let's try like 3 rem, 3 times the normal size. And let's also make the button. Yep. Okay. That kind of gets the awesome design we did. So I added a paragraph to have the click count on the page, and a button tag to store the button. So button may be a new tag for some, right? It represents the clickable button we've seen on most sites.
What did you do in CSS for the button?
So in the CSS, I just made the body text align center, and I made p tags and buttons 3 rem just to make them bigger. And I put text align center in the body. It's just going to align. It's going to put everything in the center of the page.
I always thought you had the flex box to make some text line up.
No, yeah. So this is it's only going to apply to text things, but they're all going to be centered. Yeah.
It'll center them in the contain too.
It'll and whatever their parent is.
Right.
So text align center says within the parent how much space the parent has, they'll be in the center. And we'll see this probably a little later when we do the group exercise. We'll see the implications of that. Okay, just a little bit. And here's our app. What we'd love to have happen is every time we click this button, we want something to happen. Right? What we want to have happen is we really want this click count to start out as 0. Maybe we just have this as a 0. And every time we click this click me, we want this to become 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this is going to kind of combine your questions about the DOM and changing things on the screen. So when we look at our HTML, we've added two tags, two elements to our page, this P tag and this button. When our browser loads this HTML page, it takes the text of our HTML document, it reads it, and it builds a representation of that in the browser's memory. So the HTML content is only like a recipe for how to build the visual of the page. So our browser reads this and says, okay, there's a body, right? I know that's going to be the contents of the page. Aha, I see a P tag, and it builds in its memory a P element, a paragraph element, and it puts that into its memory. And then below that, it sees the button tag. It builds a button element and puts that into its memory. And it's building this hierarchy, this nested kind of tree, right? Parents and children, like we have parents and children here, right? P is a child of the body, button is a child of the body, so forth and so on. And we've seen before already we have ULs and LIs. There's a parent and child relationship there. The browser is building that same relationship in its memory that came from our HTML. Right? You can think of the DOM as the live version of this HTML, where HTML is the initial state, the initial representation of the page. Okay? So the browser reads the HTML and builds all these elements, shows them to you on the page, and then we have the ability to go in and change those. Right? So the HTML that we create here is like the starting state of what we build. Right? This is, if you've already played with Inspector, you've already kind of seen this. This Elements tab here, let's make this a little bigger. This Elements tab, I mean, it kind of looks like what your page looks like, right? With button and the P tag, right? And we can click on these things and we can highlight them and see them. What we see here in the Elements tab is the browser's view of the DOM, the document object model. Everything that starts over here becomes an element over here. So we have a P tag here on the left in HTML. We have a P element over here. We have a button tag and element over here. We get a button element over here. So this, since we haven't done anything dynamic yet, just represents this loaded into the browser's memory.
But you're still working in the DOM. If you're working in HTML in Inspect and manipulating that, you are manipulating the DOM.
Yeah, this is you can think of the DOM as the browser's current thinking about what's on the page. The DOM is what's currently on the page, all the elements and their parent-child relationships, all of their contents and their status, whether they're visible or hidden. The DOM keeps track of all that. It's the browser keeping track of what's on the page. The HTML kind of initializes that world. Right? That's where the browser gets its initial version of this DOM. Right?
So are we ever not working in the DOM?
When you are here, you are always, if you're manipulating elements, you're always working in the DOM. Right? The browser is nothing but a visual view of this. Right? This is how the computer sees it. Right? The computer doesn't see these pixels. The computer sees this. Right? The computer sees there's a body and a P and a button. Right? If I come in here and I delete this, if I delete this element from the DOM, it goes off the page. Right? It's not on my HTML, right? Because this is the live view of the page. Anything that I manipulate, I'm just manipulating this view of what the page is like. Right?
Okay, so if we were coding blind in VS Code, not inspecting or even looking at what we're doing, we're not working in the DOM.
Over here, you're just working in an HTML file.
Right.
The DOM only exists once you load the HTML in the browser.
Okay.
The DOM is the way the computer, the browser, looks at your code. The DOM is a conceptual model of your page. when it starts, it's exactly the same as the HTML file. Any element you put in your HTML shows up in the DOM in the browser. But from that point, we can start manipulating it. We can add new elements. Clearly, you can delete elements. Yesterday, we saw how to change the text content of elements. It becomes alive, right? The DOM is the way the computer sees your HTML so that we can turn it into something that's alive and manipulatable. So all the things we can do here in inspect, in the elements inspector, all these things that it's doing, we can do too. We can come in and delete elements. We can come in and add classes to them. We can come in and change the text of them. Right? All the things you can do here in inspect, we can do with JavaScript code. That's what makes the web interactive. Okay, so let's reload this page. So we have this P tag, and we have a button for click me. Let's start trying to make this something where we can click on this button and have a thing happen. Let's go ahead and take a look at our main.js.
Yeah. When you're talking about the button, I see it's got like a default margin padding order. That's always the same.
This is what the browser's style sheet gives it. So you know how we have screen.css and we can come in and define these styles? The browser has its own internal style sheet that the developers at Chrome created, right? The Google developers created. Same thing with IE and Edge and Firefox. They have their own internal style sheet. That's the margin and padding that they've declared inside of their code for what a button should have. Just like we have ULs and LIs have the default list styles, those things we can override.
By just adding your own.
Just by adding our own. Yep. And you can always see them, right, if you scroll down below your CSS for a button, right? So you can see here in gray all of these, and look where it says that CSS comes from, the user agent style sheet. So in technical terms, we don't call these browsers, we call these user agents. That's what your browser actually called. It's called a user agent. And this is the style sheet that's baked into your browser. And by default, it has a border color and a style and some width and some padding. All of these things we could override if we wanted to style this button. But for now, we're just going to leave that being. So the first thing I'd like to do is make it so that this 0 isn't kind of hard-coded in this P here. Because eventually we're going to want this 0 to change. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So the very first thing we're going to do is at the top of our program, we're going to make a variable to track the count. So we're going to make a variable to track how many times this button has been counted. And then for now, what I tell you is we're going to write all of our code inside of this main. We're going to talk about what this main is and why it's here in a minute, but we've got to learn a few more things first before we can talk about that. But just know that in most of these programs, while we're working at that beta, we're going to write our code inside of this main function. Right? And we can see it's a function because it kind of follows that pattern. Const main equals parentheses arrow brace. This is our main function. So if we have this count being 0, it'd be nice to be able to change this to our 0. Maybe we'll go back and we'll put this back to count so we can see if it works. So let's change that text back to count. And then as we have the code change this to 0 and 1, 2, we'll be able to see it happen.
Is there any reason why you wouldn't declare the variable count in main?
We'll see why in a minute. Yeah, we'll see why in a minute. Yes, we can, and no, we can't. Depends on how we do something in a minute. So what we'd like to do is when our program loads, put whatever the current count is inside of this p tag. Here's our p tag. Here's our p tag here. We'd like to change this word count to the current count that's inside this variable. So in order to do that, we have to first find the p tag, change the p tag text into whatever is inside of the variable count. So you'll notice that when coding, I will try and write out in English what I think my program needs to do. The more descriptive you can write this out, the easier it will be to come behind and write the code. What I'm doing here is writing out the algorithm for my code. And I'm writing a recipe for what I think the code needs to do. I'm going to let you in on a secret. Programmers don't get paid to write code. We don't. We get paid to write algorithms. We get paid to do this step. Writing the JavaScript code is not what you get paid for. Because tomorrow you're going to get paid to write Haskell, and the day after that you're going to get hired to write .NET, and the day after that you're going to get hired to write PHP, and the day after that you're going to get hired to do something else. This part here is what programming is. Right? The writing of the code is just turning the instructions that you've formulated in your mind or you've written out into whatever particular language you happen to be programming in that day. And the programming part, the writing of the code, is mostly just trying to get this into a language the computer can understand.
Is that kind of the idea behind keeping a whiteboard with you, to sort of map it out in your brain without actually applying code, but just like forming a mental picture?
It's whatever process you personally need to get to the point where you can have written out instructions. I was saying, I think it was John and I were talking yesterday about this process, and I said that imagine the computer to be the most picky 3-year-old you've ever met. If you can explain in descriptions how something's going to happen in so much detail, right, that a 3-year-old could understand it, you're writing algorithms at the right level of detail. Right? The more we can specify the nitty-picky, low-level details of something, the better we can write down these steps, the better we're going to be at giving this to the computer, the easier it will be to translate this into code. Right? The better we get at this, translating into code will be the, quote, simple step. We're going to give you some guides as to how to do this portion. Right? Some strategies on building these algorithms, these steps. And I think on Friday we're going to do an exercise that will kind of solidify this for you. But for now, I'm going to try and just write out what I think these steps are. And then we'll see how we can go back and write the code for this. So I think this might be enough. Let's find out. So, right, I said we don't get paid to write the code, we get paid to do this. So I'm going to go back and now and underneath each one of these comments, I'm going to write the equivalent JavaScript code that kind of matches that set of instructions. So to find the p tag, this is where our query selector comes in. I want to find this element on the page. I know that this is my document query selector. That's the tool that we have that says, hey, live version of the web page, I would like you to go use CSS selectors to go find an element on the page. So let's make a variable. Let's call it the p tag. And let's make that equal to document query selector for the p tag. Okay. Find the p tag. Well, that's the JavaScript way of doing that. Document query selector for the p, and put that inside of a variable. Here's the next top tip. Notice I will have typed this line of code and I will hit save. And I'm looking to see if my page did anything, or if I have, I'm going to turn off preserve log, right? Or if my page had any errors. Come on, mouse. Right? Cool, no errors. But I want to know if this worked. Right? How do I know if that line of code I just wrote did what I think it did? Right? I don't tend to write more than 1 or 2, maybe 3 lines of code without checking my work. I am continuously writing a little bit of code, checking that it works. Write a little bit of code, check that it works. Right? I think most people, before they start programming, think that programming is like this. Hey, I want you to write this program, and then we sit back and we think. Right? Let me ponder this. Cool, I got it. And then we sit down and we just write out all the code, and we hit save, and it works. Or we write all the code, and then we try and figure out why it's not working. The reality of it is, we think and then we write out these instructions, this algorithm, and then we come back in and we try and write the code and check that it works. So I'm going to do 1 line of code and check to see if it worked. So how will I know if this works? I'm going to borrow our friend console log. So I'm going to ask the browser, hey, you got that variable p tag? Why don't you just log it to the console for me? I'm going to ask the document, hey, go find that p tag. And then me, the developer, I'm going to add on a little bit to say, log that out to the console and see if it was. Right? So you notice here in my browser, I have a little p count tag. Even visually, that's what I expected. I expected it to find the p tag that has the word count in it. I can even come over here and hover on it, and it'll show me visually that it's the thing that I thought it was. Cool. I just checked my work. That's kind of what I was hoping to get. I asked to find the p tag. I used document query selector to find it. Let me console log it to see it. So now I want to change the p tag text to whatever's inside of variable count. So I can ask my p tag to set its text content. And if I'm like, I'm not quite sure how to get whatever's inside of the variable count in there yet, maybe I will just put in something like Taco Tuesday. Right? I'm not sure yet, but I know I can do text. Let me try this. Ah, cool. That worked. I changed what's inside of that. So that's my check myself. Now I got to figure out how to put the content of count in there. Let me just try this. Hey, here's my 0. P tag text content count. The next thing I'll do is, hey, what if this started out as 12? Cool. Whatever's inside of that count variable is what that text on the screen is going to start out at. If I make it 42, it starts out at 42. Nice. So let's put this back to 0. The next thing you want to have happen is anytime the user clicks on the button, we're going to increment the value of count, change the p tag to show what is inside the variable count. Every time someone clicks on the button, I want to increment what's in that count variable. I want to add 1, increment. Right? Increment by 1, add 1 to what's inside of count, and change the p tag to show that. So now I need a way to know whether or not that button was clicked. So I need to expand this a little bit. So first I have to find the button. And then I have to say, tell the button, anytime you are clicked, call a function. So every time that click me is clicked, I want it to call a function. Kind of like yesterday where we had our greeting functions, right? We could say like, hey, greet Gavin and its favorite number. I want the same thing to happen. Every time we click that button, it's going to call some function that I design. So we know how to find the button. It's just like our query selector, except what tag am I going to put in here? What am I looking for? No. Button.
Oh, yeah.
I'm looking for the button. Right? How do I check to see if I got the right thing?
I have one question.
Mhm.
You got constant button document query selector really fast. How do you do this so fast?
So when you start typing document dot, it knows all the things that the document can do. And when I type in query, it kind of has a little pop down. Are you getting the pop down like this?
Yeah.
Okay. So I just went down arrow, down arrow, down arrow, down arrow, down arrow, enter. Yeah.
Okay, I'm with it. Thank you.
And button. Right. So how would I know if this code is doing what I want it to do? How would I know if this found the button correctly? Yeah, console log. I'm going to console log the button. Oops, typo. I'm going to console log the button. Hey, there's my button. Also notice that over here it tells me what line of code that console log came from. So this is the console log that happened on line 8. This is the console log that happened on line 17. So I'm looking at my console log. I can say, yep, that was the button from line 17, and this was the console log from line 8. That's pretty helpful. So now we know we have the right button. Now we need it to call a function. The function is going to do this part. This is the part that the function is going to do. The function does this. It increments the value of the count, and it changes the p tag to show what's inside the variable count. That's what the function is going to do. Let's go write the function first. Seems a little bit weird, right? We're waiting for a click, and then we're going to do something. I want to show you the function first. I'm going to show you how to tie them together. So we're going to write a new function. We're going to write it up here outside of the main. Let's write a new function. So the purpose of this function is to increment the value of count and change the p tag. Somebody want to suggest a name for the function? What would you call it? Yeah, let's call it counter. Right? So here's our standard how to write a function. Right? You notice I'm trying to write const for my functions. It's a habit. It's kind of a current style of saying a function. Right? So yesterday we did lets. I didn't want to confuse you with the difference between let and const. But almost always when I write functions like this, I'm going to write const. Because I'm never going to change what counter means. I'm never going to give the variable counter a different function. Question?
Can you use the arrow syntax with the function keyword?
No. Those are two ways of doing the same thing. So if you have come from older JavaScript, you may have written this. These two are equivalent except for one small difference that we don't have enough context yet to understand. These two are exactly the same thing except for one very subtle difference. And for those who have had some experience with JavaScript who are curious about that, I will talk to you about it in the afternoon. But we will find out why we're doing this arrow function in like week 4. We'll see why. And it's not so important to this code, but in week 4 it'll become tremendously important. And I just want to get you in the habit of that so that when we get there, I don't have to shift your thinking. So what does this counter do? Well, I've got the instructions right here. Let me take these instructions and move them up here. This is what the function does. So the very first thing it does is it increments the value of count. So, I'm not quite sure how to do that. Let me come over to the playground and see if I can work on that. Right? So when I get to an instruction I'm not really sure about, this is where the console comes in handy. Right? I know how to do it. I'm just putting myself in your mind like, oh, increment the count. How would we do that? So over here, let's make a, let's not call it count. Let number equals 0. So let's pretend like we're over here and we're kind of playing around with number. So if I say let number equal 0 and here's number, how would I add 1 to number? So from yesterday we know that we can do math like this. So number plus 1 is 1, and I can assign it. If I say number equals number plus 1, I get 1. And if I do number equals number plus 1 again, I get 2, and then 3, and then 4. Right? I'm incrementing number. So I can say number, here my number is count. Count equals count plus 1. That will increment the value of count. Remember that JavaScript is going to start on the right and evaluate everything that's on the right-hand side of the equal sign. It's going to compute what the answer is first. So it's going to do count plus 1. So if count is 0, count plus 1 becomes 1, and that gets pushed back into the variable count. And there's some shortcuts to this we can talk about another time. Write that a little bit shorter. But this is kind of holding to the value of what we said when we increment the value of count. Right? Change the p tag to show what's inside the variable count. We've already got that code. Right? Isn't it just all of this? Right? This is where we set it to 0. So let's get our p tag variable and update it. We already know how to change the p tag to show what's inside the variable count. We did that down here. Right, we find the p tag, we say p tag text content is count. So here's our counter function. So boy, I hope I did that right. I'm not sure. I haven't seen any effect of it. So down here, we can just call that function. Let's just call counter. Hey, the 0 became a 1. We found the p tag, we made the text content of the p tag count, and then we just called counter 1 time. If you call it 1 time, the 0 is going to become a 1. But what we really want is every time we click this button, what do we want to have happen? We want counter to happen every time I click the button. So in addition to being able to affect the text content of a tag, we can also tell it we want to wait for events. So JavaScript and the browser is an event-driven system. Your browser loads your page and just sits there waiting for things to happen. The things that it waits to happen are enormous, right? It waits for the mouse to move. It waits for clicks to happen. It waits for you to scroll. It waits for you to drag. There are all different kinds of events in the browser that the user could do, or even the network could do, that the browser is waiting to have happen. It's kind of sitting there looking for events to come in. And when those events happen, we can ask it to do certain things. We can tell the browser, hey, I know you're waiting for this click to happen, and every time the click happens, right, you do this like shading of the button, right, you do this little animation effect. In addition to doing that, I want you to do something on my behalf. I'm going to tell you, hey button, every time you're clicked, there's more work for you to do. I want you to call a function that I've given you every time that button happens. And the way we do that is through a method called add-event-listener. So we're going to ask the button, I'm going to do it down here. Let me move this up on the screen. Every time the button is clicked, we want to do something. This is with a method called add-event-listener. An add-event-listener takes two things. It takes two things. It takes the name of the event, and it takes a function to call when that event happens. So we're asking the button, hey button, I want you to sit around and wait for something to happen. I'm going to tell you what that event is, and every time that event happens, I'm going to tell you which function I've created to call. So what are we waiting to have happen to the button? click. So that's the name of the event. We're saying, hey, button, every time you're clicked, I want you to do a function. What's the function I want it to call? Anyway, counter. Every time, I'm gonna delete that explicit call to counter. Hey, button, every time you are clicked, I want you to wait around for that click, and every time it happens, I want you to call counter.
Is click, we're not making that up. That's
No.
stored. Okay.
Yeah, that's given to us by the DOM.
Okay.
So if you go into, and this will be in the links that I give you, if you go into MDN or any reference, it will tell you all of the events that could happen. Right? There's lists of dozens and dozens and dozens of events.
I'm not sure what I did wrong, but something within the JavaScript over here, my button, like where it has a little box around it, mine went away.
JavaScript has a little box around it.
I'm talking about like the display. I'm missing a box around my button.
Disappeared.
Yeah, my button disappeared.
Yeah, mine's not there when I'm inspecting. But
Really?
It's there when I'm not. You close your inspection, do you get the button back? So is there a button there, and then it goes away. I'm pretty sure it's something
Oh, yeah.
about the way
Oh,
the screen's set.
it's probably, let's get out of responsive mode.
Oh.
It's probably because you're in the responsive mode. Get out of the device view mode. That's probably your challenge. Are you in like the thing where you have the iPhone list? Yep.
Yeah, that was it. Okay.
Yeah, it was the same thing that was happening to Frank. And I forgot to commit along the way. Darn it, I would have committed already. Shoot, sorry. I'll do better next time. So looking at this line of code, button, add event listener, we can translate this to say, button, wait around for something to happen. What do you want me to wait for? A click. There's going to be a list of all the different kinds of things we can wait to have happen. Clicks, mouse enter, the mouse moved, you're driving something, you right-clicked, you hovered. Huge list. Right? But we're waiting for the simplest one. We're waiting for it to be clicked. And when it's clicked, what do we want to have happen? Please call my function counter. Notice that I didn't put parentheses after counter. I don't want to call counter. I want to tell the browser what function to call. Right? The function is inside of that variable. That's the name of the function I want it to call.
So
Can I-
you replaced counter on the function counter with that.
Mm-hmm. Right. So before I just called it once, and my 0 became a 1. I don't want to do that when the program runs. What I want to have happen is every time I click the button, I want it to call my function. When I had it before, I was calling it explicitly. I was calling the function once. Now what I'm telling it is, every time that button is clicked, call that function. And if I save this, now hopefully every time I click this button, that clicks. I will put a copy of this in Slack for us. Oh, that's not it.
How do you
So let's add some more features to this. So here's the code if you all want to copy and paste and follow along.
Maybe I don't know. It says p tag is not defined. I guess that was my question earlier. Why we drug p tag.textContent equals count from the main function up into counter. I think that's my issue.
This just sets it once. This just does this once, right? When we start the program, we want to set the text content of the p tag one time to whatever's inside of count. And then we want to do that same work again after we increment it.
That's what I'm missing. You defined it again within the counter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can totally do that. This p tag variable is different than that p tag variable.
Right. Okay.
You see how this p tag is the p tag variable inside of the main function. This p tag variable is the variable inside of the counter function.
So they never interact.
These do not interact. This p tag is a different variable than this p tag, right? So let's take a look at a different function or event. Right now, every time I'm clicking this button, right? This is incrementing. What if I change this click to mouse move? See that? Every time my mouse moves, that number is going up. I'm just moving my mouse back and forth. So there are all different kinds of events that can have happened, but right, and now I'm clicking and nothing's happening. Right? So the name of the event that's here determines how that behavior happens. Now every time I'm clicking, this number is going up.
If you wanted to add multiple events, could you just comma space?
No, you have to do a separate event listener. It's one event to one function. So if I wanted the click to do one thing and something else to do another, I'd have to do that. That goes to Frank's question. How would we count the other ways? Let's add like a hidden feature that resets the counter. In question from Toby.
When you say one event per function, you're not talking about like within the main function. Like we could add multiple event listeners.
Yes. What John was asking is, could I say, when this is clicked, he was asking, can I say when it's clicked or it's mouse move, like this? No.
Right.
It's one event per call to add event listener. But we're going to see here in a second that we can listen for two different events and call two different functions. So let's add another function that resets. Let's make a function called reset. What this function is going to do is set the count to 0, and then change the p tag to show what is inside the variable count. Well, shoot, we know how to do that, right? Isn't it just the same as this? So let's copy that code and paste it here. How do we set the count to 0? Count equals 0. So now we have a reset function. We have a function that counts, and we have another function called reset that changes the count to 0, then changes the p tag. Let's add a second event listener down here. That's going to be when we right-click on the button. So I never remember these because there are so many events. So I'm going to search for MDN right-click event. This would probably be the Google search I would do. MDN right-click event. Oh, even in the little brief, I see that click is fired when the pointing device button, usually a mouse. The context menu event is fired when the right button of the mouse is clicked. So I probably want to look at this one. The context menu event is fired, is sent, when the right button of the mouse is clicked. Cool. Do they have a little demo? Sometimes they have demos at the top. They don't. So this is telling me that this is the name of the event for right click. So it's click is the left click, and context menu is the right click. So let's see what happens now. Click, 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 click. I'm going to right click, 0. Click, 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 click. Right click, 0. Interesting. Click, 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 click. Right click, 0. You see what's happening is that the right click is still happening. See how the context menu keeps popping up? I'm clicking. When I right click, I get the context menu. What I wish would happen is that right click wouldn't even happen. I want the right click just to reset, but I don't want this to happen. I don't want this to happen. I don't want the highlighting to happen. So what we don't know is one of the things that this function is going to be given is the event that happened. Remember I said the browser's waiting for events to happen, like, hey, something was clicked, or the right click happened, or the mouse moved. Our function here does take an argument. It takes the very first argument it takes is the event that happened. So the reset and the counter really do take an argument that gets sent to us by the browser. The browser is going to tell us, hey, when you were right-clicked, this is the event that happened, and we can ask that event to prevent the default functionality. Don't do the default functionality that this event would have done. In this case, right-click. So we're asking the browser, hey, you just told me a right-click happened, and it's going to give you the event. You're telling that event, please don't do what you normally would do. This gets called before the little context menu pops up and before that highlighting happens. This event.prevent default says whatever that event was going to do, don't do it. If that was a link that goes off-site, that link won't go off-site. If it's a right-click that would have shown a menu, don't do it. Ever been to a site where you like right-click on an image to try and save it and it says, right? That's how they do that, right? They're preventing that default menu. So now if I save this and I click, right? I'm counting up these clicks. And if I right-click, the highlighting is still happening. I'll have to see how we stop that. I think that's another event that's happening, right? But the menu is not popping up. I right-click, and it resets. The menu popping up is what event prevent default is keeping from happening. Question?
I don't know how to ask this. How is event defined? So
the browser sends us that.
So just okay, but the event is referenced to reset where in the code.
So imagine from what you all are pretending you are role playing the reset function, and I'm going to role play the browser. So the page loads and the browser is waiting around, looking around. Whew, I wish something would happen. It's kind of boring here being a browser, right? And all of a sudden the right mouse is pressed on that button. Oh, an event happened. I'm going to build this variable called event. And I'm going to look to see, did anybody tell me they were interested in this event? Yes, you all were interested in this event, this right mouse button that happened. I'm going to take this variable, I'm going to hand it to you all. Hey, here's your event. I built this variable for you. I want to give it to you when I call your function. Kind of like yesterday how we said, like, let name equals Gavin, and then we called the greeting function, we passed that name. The browser is doing that for us. The browser built up this little event variable, and then when it calls you, it's giving you the event. You can use that event to do whatever you like. In this case, we're telling that event, don't do any work, and then we can do our work. So this event comes in, and it's given to us by the browser.
So it's like a global event. So this will, like, let's say you have, you're going to have like a separate menu that is going to come up when you click like the center mouse button. The event.prevent default will also prevent whatever.
Yeah, it's only going to prevent the event that reset is called.
Oh, okay.
Reset gets called whenever we context menu. So this is just telling the browser every time the right mouse button is clicked, what I want you to do is take whatever event happened, take that variable and this function and mash them together and let me have a chance. Every time it's clicked, I want you to take the event that happened and my counter function, put them together and call them up here. Right? We didn't use the event here, but we could put the event up here as well. It's just not used. There's nothing we need to do with the event. It's still possible for us to accept that event as an input. Right? We could say event.prevent default here, but there's no default behavior for the click. right? Clicking doesn't really do anything other than the animation, so there's no sense to do it, but we could also prevent the default there. This event and this event will be two different kinds of events. This will be a click event. This will be a context menu event. How do we know? Because that's what we asked the browser to do. We asked the browser, every time this button is clicked, I want you to call counter and give me the event that happened. So this will be a click event when a counter is called. We said, hey browser, every time you're right-clicked, call reset. Every time reset is called, this will be a right-click event.
What would happen if we change reset to counter?
Yeah, so if we made this counter here.
Oh no, I'm sorry, for constant reset?
Here, we'd get an error because we can't have two counter functions, right? It's even telling me here, like, counter's already used. It's already saying you've declared the counter function one time. You got to come up with a different name.
So it knows you have this reset.
Down here.
Yeah.
Yeah. If I swap these around, what if I said, hey, every time you click call reset and every time you context menu call counter, the behavior of my program is flipped now. Now every time I click the button, it's resetting, and every time I'm right-clicking, it's adding. So I'm right-clicking now. Now I'm left-clicking. Now I'm right-clicking. Now I'm left-clicking. Right? So all that's happening is every time this event is happening, we call this function. Well, that doesn't make sense. We should be calling counter here. We should be calling reset here. Right? The add event listener just ties together the function and the browser event that goes along with it. Question?
I don't remember if this is what I asked earlier, but I asked if something was made by the browser. Is event made by the browser?
It is.
That's not ours.
Yeah, it comes into us from the browser. Right? There's a whole bunch of JavaScript code that's running in the browser that the browser creates, and it's waiting for these events. And by saying, hey, button, listen around for a click, I'm telling it what function to remember to call. It's remembering that. Oh, Toby told me every time this specific button is clicked, which button? The one I got for query selector for the button. Every time that happens, I will call this counter. Hey, every time he right-clicks, I'm going to call the reset function. And I, the browser, will give handoff to you as first argument the event.
So if we passed in any other argument but event, something would really happen.
I can call this Taco Tuesday. What I call it does not matter.
Oh, so we did make that.
We didn't make it, we named it. That's a subtle difference. We did not create that. You didn't see me do let or const event equals, right?
Right.
I have to name this variable in my function. Just like yesterday when I named the arguments to our function, I called them like person name and person number. I'm naming this variable.
And how does it know that you're naming something that is an event? How does the function know that?
So when we had yesterday, const greet equals a function that takes a person name and a person number. It says console.log hi person name, and I call it greet with Gavin. The order in which I put these variables here is how they end up there. If I do greet Gavin 42, what goes into person name?
Gavin.
What goes into person number?
42.
Right? Because the order here is the order here. I decide what to call these variables, right? I could have called this X, Y, Z, A, B, C. I don't control what the person who calls them, who's calling me, named the variables. I can choose the name of my own arguments. Right? If I'm declaring a function, me, the programmer, I get to decide what the arguments are called. I can call them whatever I want. The person who's calling me, they don't know what I called those variables. They only know what order they're expected in. right? If I was the person who wrote the greet function and I hid it away from you, let's say I wrote the greet function, I hid it all the way down here. You don't know what I called that argument. All I've told you, hey, Toby, when you call the greet function, give me a string that's the person's name and give me a number that's their favorite number. I can call those arguments whatever I like. As weirdly named as they are, I can call them whatever I want. You don't have to know what they're called.
So for each function you set with parameter argument of event, that is a different, different parameter specific to that function. That the outside world has no idea.
Yep. I can call this Taco Tuesday, and it works just as good, right? I can call this my dog Riley, right? And this works just as good. Why in the world would I call them that? Because what they represent is an event. So we tend to try and call variables what they represent. And it's pretty standard for these kinds of event handlers, these event functions, to call the variable event. You're going to see this code everywhere when you start Googling for answers.
So do you think it's best practice as a developer, like if you have, a file that looks like this, to think about the other developers and maybe name one event, name another thing event two?
Absolutely not. That's actually worse for the developer. Why do I need to call this one event two? It's an argument to this function. When I'm looking at this function, here's how your developer brain is eventually going to look at this. Your developer brain is going to look at it like that. This is the function I'm dealing with. What's its argument? An event. What's it called? Event. What's this function? It takes an event. What's that variable called? Event. They are separate things and unique. They don't need to have a different name. The only time they need to have different names is we're at the same level. So when Kenny asks, what would happen if I called this counter? This is an error because they're at the same level, right? They're at the same level of scope, right? The same level of indentation. This const variable is at the same level as that const variable, and JavaScript says, you have to have unique names. Arguments, let me change this back. Arguments, like the p tag, see how this p tag is here and this p tag is here? They're inside one level, they're independent from each other, right? This p tag variable is a child of the counter function. This p tag is a child of the reset function. They are independent of each other. Just like this event variable and that event variable are independent of each other.
Could you put that string of code onto the catch up? So I have an error I can't find.
Let me add a snippet here. This is JavaScript.
So you were saying event is a variable.
Yes. Event is a variable that's given to me by the browser.
Reset is
A function. The reset is also a variable, but what that variable holds is a function. I would here say the reset function because it is a variable, but what it holds is a function. Right? Just like the count is a variable, but what it holds is a number. Event is a variable too. What it holds is an event object. Don't worry so much about the event. Don't focus in on this. This is not the important part of this. The important part of this is this right here. The crucial learning element of this discussion is this right here. Because this is how we tie events in the browser to functions of our creation. When this button is clicked, call this function. Add event listener is the crucial lesson for this morning. because this is what I just taught you, is this is the function that ties an element in our page, what happens, and what to do. This is, what's the thing on the page? In this case, it's the button. What thing on the page, when a thing happens, what is it I'm waiting for? A click. What should I do? Call the counter function.
So if we had something else, like a slider or something, it still would be add event.
Yep, it's always add event listener. That's the function that the browser gives us that says, hey, button, when you are clicked, this is what I want you to do. What if we wanted to change this so that when the p tag is clicked, it does the reset? Well, instead of button, add event listener, I could say, hey, p tag, when you're clicked, I want you to reset. Tell the p tag, anytime you are clicked, call the reset function. Now we've changed this. Now this counts and this resets. Right? I said, don't focus on the button anymore. Hey, p tag, when you're clicked, reset. So even elements that don't look like they have a click, like a p tag, can handle a click. Here I'm clicking on the button. Now I'm going to come up here and click on the p tag. I'm going to click on the button. I'm going to click on the p tag.
We could also have both, right? We still right click.
Yeah. If I change this back to context menu, now we're saying, hey, p tag, when you're right clicked, call reset. So now I'm left clicking on the click me, and I'm left clicking on the p tag, nothing's happened. But as soon as I right click, it sends back to 0. Right? So it's a combination of what element did you find in your browser, what event do you want to wait around for, and what's the function you want to call when that event happens. When the p tag that I found way up here, right, document query selector p, when that p tag is right-clicked, reset. Let's change this back to click. Easier. Right? There's no user interface that tells me that this is clickable. Let's add a sprinkling of CSS. Okay. Now, when I'm over that p tag, by adding cursor pointer to my CSS, doesn't that kind of give the user some indication that that's clickable? Right. Here's my normal pointer. Here's my finger pointer. Now this looks like, hey, I can click this, and I can click this. Right. So we just added a little bit of hint that we can do that.
Yeah, when you posted 37 lines of code on Slack, you're like 5 over here. Is it just advancing?
That's weird. Let me make sure I copied the right thing. Let me paste this again. Yeah, I don't think I grabbed the whole thing. Yeah, there we go, 55. Here's our whole thing. Question, John? Yeah, so you notice here that we had add event listener for click on the button, right? One of the events you can listen to is when the entire page is loaded. So one of the things you can wait around for is, hey, when is the entire page of HTML loaded and the DOM is ready? So what we're saying down here, hey, document, remember the entire document, please wait around, and when the entire page is loaded and ready, all of the DOM, every element is in your memory and everything is ready to rock and roll, please call my main function.
So you want to prepare the variables, might as well just prepare the variables before.
Yes, but what this is important for is, remember, I may have mentioned this yesterday, that we can put this script up here in the head, if we put this script up in the head, what happens is the JavaScript starts running right away. When this JavaScript runs, the browser has not had a chance to load your page into its memory. So if we start asking for query selector, if the JavaScript is loaded first, those selectors won't be there, right? The browser, by this point, when it sees this script, right, stops loading the entire DOM. Everything stops, grinds to a halt, and your JavaScript loads and starts running. At this point, the browser's only read the first 9 lines of your HTML file. It hasn't even had a chance to do the body and the P and the button. And if we started doing, hey, document query selector, the browser would be like, no, I don't have a P tag. I don't know what you're talking about, right? So this is why we tend to put the script at the bottom, right? Because you put the script at the bottom, well, all those P tags and buttons are already there. The other way we deal with this is we say, hey, even if you load at the top of the page, I don't want you to run any code yet. The only code I want you to run is once the DOM is fully loaded, all the content is on the page, then call my main function. You'll notice that if we collapse this down, this is all that happens on the page when the JavaScript is loaded. When that JavaScript file is loaded by the browser, it really only does 5 things. It makes a variable called count and sets that equal to 0. It makes a variable called counter that's a function. Doesn't call it. It makes a function called reset that's a function but doesn't call it. It makes a main function but doesn't call it. And then tells the browser, hey, when everything is loaded and ready, like just before you give control to the user, when DOM content is loaded, please call my main function. Essentially what that does is ensures the browser is fully ready. So it's like a safety net that says, please don't run any of my code that's in main until you're sure that any query selectors that I do will be valid. So if you've ever done JavaScript, if you've ever done jQuery before, right? It's like $document ready function, right? It's like old school jQuery. It's the same as this for anybody who's done jQuery before, right? So this is why I said we're going to do all of our code inside of main, because we want to make sure that everything is loaded.
Is there an advantage to doing that as opposed to just putting your code at the last flag tag?
It's really better to do both. So they're both safety nets around the same issue. And it doesn't cost you anything to have that event listener. So the reason why is I might be writing the JavaScript and somebody else might be writing the HTML. And if they decide later to like, oh, that script tag's at the bottom, I should move it to the top. And they've just broken all of your JavaScript code. Because you'll find on some teams, you write the JavaScript, but someone 4 offices down is writing the HTML. And they may change the order of that. And you can't control that, but you can control this.
So you're saying if the script was in the header, our JavaScript, because we're calling the main function last, you can't find a button, so therefore it won't
work.
It won't start.
Yeah. So let's try that. Let's say let early button equal to document query selector button. Let's console.log. I am at the top of the script. And button is console.log button. So what I would hope to see is, oops, early button. Early button. I am at the top of the script. Here's my mouse. And button is this. Right? Because the JavaScript is loaded after the button is declared. Let's move it up here. Uh-oh. I'm at the top of the script and button is null. So when we load the JavaScript up here, it starts running, and when the browser gets to that line, document query selector, it's like, I don't know, dude. All I've seen is this. The only thing that the browser knows at that point are these lines. Even to the point that if I move the script here, the same thing is going to happen. Right? What if I ask for the p tag? Let early p tag be document query selector, query selector p. Let's log these things. Right? See, it knows the p tag, but it doesn't know the button. Why? Because the p tag already exists by the time the script loads. If I move this script line up one, now they're both going to be null. So now, if I move these things inside of main, now it doesn't matter where I load these things, right? Doesn't matter where I put my script, I can put it up here, and the button and the p tag are there. I can put the main down here, right? Because this main code is not going to be run until the entire browser is loaded. The very last thing the browser is going to do before it gives control to me is load up my main function. That's why.
So if you had JavaScript running like in a footer or something like that, you need to put it after.
Yeah. Yeah. The general rule, the style is to put your JavaScript last and then wrap everything in a DOM content loaded. And AppApp will do this for you. Right? AppApp just kind of follows that standard. That's why we just write our code inside of main.
When we get to the workplace, do people do this? Or
They should. They should, but they don't always. Yeah. The other reason why we tend to put JavaScript at the bottom, and this is a technical reason, is unless you do some fancy things with your JavaScript, your entire browser pauses while that script loads. So imagine if you had these script tags in the middle of a big page. Ever been on a page where like this page kind of half loads and then pauses and then continues loading? It's because they have a huge page and they put a script tag right in the middle of it. And that script tag is slow. Right? So we don't want to stop the loading of the page. We just want the script to happen at the end really quickly. So if you put the script at the top, you might get a blank page for a while that script loads. Or in the middle, you might get half the page to render and then the script to load. So for efficiency's sake, we can also put it at the bottom. There are other technical ways around that, but this is kind of the best practice. Put your scripts at the bottom and wrap everything in a DOM content. The most important thing to take away from this morning, we'll take a quick break and then let's get back together and do a group coding exercise, is really this line right here. This is the important thing. This is the thing we've added today. We're still using our query selector from yesterday. Let's go find that element in the page. What we've added is the ability to tell that button to wait around for a click. And then we tell it what to do. When you're clicked, call the counter function that I created. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, here's what I'd like to do. In a round-robin form, we'll take some volunteers. And we're going to build this. This is normally one of the homework assignments that you would get. We're going to do it in the hour that we have left in lecture this morning. If we run out of time, we'll finish it at 2. We're going to build this scoreboard. That's going to look like this. It's going to have my scoreboard at the top. It's going to have 2 teams, Team 1 and Team 2, that have some scores. They'll probably start at 0, not at 10. And at the bottom, we're going to have an input field where we can change the team's name from Team 1 to something else. This says update Team 1 name, input field, and update. This says update Team 1 score, and an add 1 button, and a subtract 1 button. But as we click these, that score is going to go up and down. Then on this side, we're going to have a Team 2 with an independent score, independent of this one. Same thing, update Team 2's name. We should change this, and 2 buttons here that add and subtract to this. So kind of similar to what we did with the Click Me button, but in a more complex, more full page. This is going to use a lot of the skills that we have so far, right? We're probably going to make a flex layout for this. Then we're going to start putting buttons and elements on the page, and then get them to react to clicks on the page.
What about the header stuff?
Yep, we're going to build all of this. We'll build this as a team, as a group exercise, when we get back. So let's take a brief break. It's 10:52 on my clock. Let's take a break until 11, and when we come back, we'll talk about how we do the round robin programming, and we're going to build this. So I'll put the link to this in the Slack if you want to take a look at it while we're on our break.